Welcome back to Central Colorado Ballistics. My name is Wally. Before there was Colorado, before there were towns, before there were sheriffs, there were soldiers, and long before there were laws written by civilians, there were rules enforced at gunpoint. This land wasn't ungoverned. It was governed differently, and who you were determined which rules applied to you. Settlers remember the West as empty. The Army never did, because before families arrived with wagons, the United States arrived with forts, and with them came the first firearm restrictions. Before 1861, Colorado did not exist. This land was divided among territories: Kansas, Nebraska, Utah, New Mexico, and before any of that, it was native land, governed by tribes, by treaty, and increasingly by military force. There were no town councils here yet. No municipal codes. No local consent. But there was authority, and it wore a uniform. Before civilian government, the U.S. Army functioned as law enforcement. They protected routes, enforced treaties, controlled movement, and decided who could carry arms. Forts came before towns. Bent's Fort, Fort Laramie, Fort Garland, Fort Lyon. These weren't symbolic. They were tools of control. The Army regulated firearms in three ways. First, by arming soldiers. Second, by restricting civilians. And third, by disarming native populations. For Native Americans, firearm regulation wasn't municipal. It was military. Federal law restricted the sale of firearms to tribes. Traders required licenses. Unauthorized sales were criminal. After conflicts, disarmament was common, sometimes temporary, often permanent. This wasn't about safety. It was about leverage. A disarmed population was easier to move, easier to control, and easier to confine. The same land, different rules, based on who held power. Firearm laws were rarely neutral. They often targeted specific groups. Prohibitions on selling guns to Native Americans. Restrictions tied to race or legal status. The language was sometimes broad, but enforcement was selective, and that distinction matters. When settlers arrived, they entered a space already regulated. The Army supported territorial governors, marshals, and appointed officials. Soldiers backed arrests, protected courts, and enforced disarmament when ordered. For settlers, this was often their first experience with federal authority up close. They brought firearms for survival. Frontier culture did not invent self-defense. It inherited it from English common law, which often emphasized a duty to retreat before using deadly force. The idea that every confrontation must end in gunfire is a modern myth, but found themselves navigating a system where arms were conditional because territorial governments were not states. They were considered transitional, not yet mature. And because of that, they were often granted wider latitude to regulate behavior in ways that might have been challenged in older states. This included firearms. In 1875, the Wyoming Territory prohibited carrying firearms in cities, towns, or villages, punishable by fine or imprisonment. This wasn't unusual. Many frontier towns restricted concealed weapons, sometimes labeled deadly weapons, Bowie knives, pocket pistols, concealed revolvers. Public carry wasn't automatically accepted. It was regulated, sometimes heavily. The West was not lawless. It was highly managed. In 1878, Congress passed the Posse Comitatus Act. It limited the ability of the U.S. Army to function as a civilian police force, to act as a posse, to enforce everyday local law. This marked a turning point. Federal soldiers would no longer be a default answer for civilian enforcement. As populations grew, civilian law replaced military enforcement. But the habits remained. Towns inherited military thinking. Control first. Order before consent. When Colorado Territory was created, it didn't start from scratch. It refined what already existed. So before Colorado, there were soldiers. Before sheriffs, there were forts. And before civilian gun laws, there was enforcement. In the next episode, we finally enter Colorado Territory and watch what happens when population explodes and authority tries to keep up, not through theory, but through law and through force. When people imagine the Wild West, they picture chaos, but the historical record shows something else. A high demand for order, strict local rules, and constant negotiation between liberty and control. Modern debates often ignore that. Freedom secured, rights defended.